What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved stars comes face to face with a host who's completely lost control? You won't believe what unfolds when Hugh Jackman sits down for what should have been a routine interview, only to find himself trapped in a verbal battlefield that would end his appearance in the most dramatic way possible. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the moment when years of brewing tension finally exploded on live television, leaving viewers speechless and the entertainment world scrambling for answers. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two titans of entertainment clash in ways nobody saw coming. Last night's episode started like any other. The audience was buzzing with anticipation as Stephen Colbert introduced his guest with his trademark theatrical flair. But those who know the behind-the-scenes dynamics could already sense something was off. The host's usual comedic timing seemed forced, his smile a little too tight, and there was an edge to his voice that regular viewers might have missed, but industry insiders recognized immediately. The warning signs were all there for anyone paying close attention to the subtle shifts in energy and body language. Hugh Jackman walked out to thunderous applause, that signature charm radiating from him as he waved to the crowd with characteristic warmth and enthusiasm. But as he settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket and flashing that famous smile that had charmed millions worldwide, something shifted in the atmosphere. The chemistry that usually makes these interviews sparkle was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a palpable tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst, charged with electricity that made everyone uncomfortable. "Hugh, great to have you back," Colbert began, but his tone carried an undertone that suggested this wasn't going to be the friendly reunion everyone expected. "I have to say, I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. There's so much we need to discuss tonight." Jackman, ever the consummate professional, flashed his million-dollar smile. But those watching closely could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Always a pleasure, Stephen. Though I have to admit, your invitation came with some interesting talking points that caught me completely off guard." The host leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk playing across his lips. But there was something predatory about it now, like a shark circling its prey in dark waters. "Well, you know me, Hugh. I like to dig deep. Get to the real story behind the headlines. The stuff that really matters to people watching at home." "And what story would that be exactly?" Jackman's voice maintained its pleasant tone, but there was steel underneath now, a hint of the intensity he brought to his most dramatic and powerful roles. The audience laughed nervously, thinking this was all part of the show's usual banter. But the energy between the two men was electric, with an entirely different kind of tension. Colbert shuffled his cards with deliberate slowness, drawing out the moment like a cat playing with its prey, before delivering the killing blow. "Oh, you know, the usual Hollywood stuff. The projects, the philanthropy, the charitable work, the interesting choice of business partners lately." The last part dropped like a stone into still water, creating ripples of discomfort that even the studio audience began to pick up on immediately. Jackman's posture straightened almost imperceptibly, his hands resting carefully on the armrests of his chair. Anyone who knew him well would recognize this as his tell, the moment when the affable movie star disappeared, and something much more serious took its place. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Stephen, but if you have something to say, perhaps you should just say it directly." "Oh, I'm not implying anything," Colbert replied, his voice dripping with false innocence that fooled absolutely nobody in the room. "I'm just curious about your recent involvement with certain environmental initiatives, specifically the ones that seem to conflict with some of your other investments and business dealings." The air in the studio grew thick with anticipation and dread. This wasn't the playful ribbing that late-night audiences expected from these interactions. This was something else entirely, something that felt personal and deliberately confrontational, designed to embarrass and humiliate. Jackman's jaw tightened slightly, but his media training kept his expression mostly neutral. I think there might be some misinformation in whatever research your team has done, Jackman said carefully, his voice measured and controlled despite the obvious provocation. My environmental work has always been transparent and consistent with my values and beliefs. Colbert's laugh was sharp and humorless, cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Transparent? That's an interesting word choice, Hugh, because what I'm looking at here suggests that transparency isn't exactly your strongest suit these days, is it? The audience was starting to sense that something was seriously wrong with this interview. The usual rhythm of a late-night talk show had been completely abandoned, replaced by something that felt more like a hostile interrogation. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, wondering if they should be witnessing this. I think you need to be very careful about what you're suggesting here, Jackman said, his voice dropping to a lower register that anyone familiar with his more dramatic roles would recognize immediately. This wasn't Wolverine's growl, but it carried the same underlying warning of danger. Careful? Colbert leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with what could only be described as malicious delight, feeding off the discomfort in the room. Hugh, I'm just asking questions. Questions that I think the public deserves answers to. Questions about how someone can champion environmental causes while simultaneously what? Jackman interrupted, his composure finally showing the first real cracks as his voice rose slightly. What exactly are you accusing me of, Stephen? What's your endgame here? The host's smile widened into something genuinely unsettling, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be, and it was then that everyone watching realized this wasn't going to end well. There was something calculated about this attack, something that suggested it had been planned and orchestrated long before Jackman had even stepped foot in the studio. The malicious intent was now impossible to hide, written across Colbert's face like a roadmap to destruction. But what nobody could have predicted, not even the seasoned television producers frantically signaling from the control room, was just how far Colbert was willing to push one of Hollywood's most respected and beloved figures, or how explosive and career-defining Jackman's response would ultimately become when his legendary patience and professionalism finally ran out completely. The tension was suffocating now, like a pressure cooker about to explode, and every person in that studio could feel the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just television anymore. This was the moment when everything would change forever, when careers would be made or destroyed in the span of a few devastating words that couldn't be taken back once they were spoken on live television for millions to witness. The atmosphere had become toxic, poisonous with malice and calculated cruelty that left everyone wondering how this had been allowed to happen. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the uncomfortable shuffling of the studio audience and the distant hum of cameras capturing every moment of this unfolding disaster. Colbert reached into his desk drawer with theatrical precision, pulling out a manila folder that he placed deliberately on his desk. The sound of paper against wood seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet studio like a gunshot in a library. "Let me be more specific," Colbert said, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a hostile jury. "Your Laughing Man Coffee Company. Beautiful brand, great marketing campaign. Really tugs at the heartstrings with all that fair trade messaging and feel-good storytelling." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "But here's what's interesting, Hugh. The supply chain tells a very different story than the one you've been selling to the public." Jackman's knuckles whitened, as his hands gripped the armrests of his chair with increasing force. "Stephen, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but my coffee company has been independently verified by multiple organizations. We've been completely transparent about our practices and sourcing methods." "Transparent," Colbert repeated, savoring the word like a fine wine that had turned to vinegar. "There's that word again. Tell me, Hugh, how transparent were you about the plantation conditions in Guatemala?" The ones that your company sources from through 3 different shell companies designed to obscure the truth. The audience had gone, completely silent now, their earlier nervous laughter replaced by an uncomfortable tension that you could cut with a knife. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was character assassination, happening in real time on national television. Several people in the front row exchanged worried glances, sensing they were witnessing something that would be replayed endlessly across social media within hours. "You're walking into dangerous territory here," Jackman warned, his Australian accent becoming more pronounced as his composure continued to crack under the relentless assault. "These are serious allegations you're making without any foundation or credible evidence to support them." Colbert opened the folder with exaggerated care, pulling out what appeared to be documents and photographs. "Foundation? Oh, I have plenty of foundation, mate." His mockery of Jackman's accent was deliberate and cruel, designed to humiliate and provoke. "Photographs from last month. Working conditions that would make Victorian England blush with shame. Children as young as 12 picking beans that end up in your premium blends." "That's absolutely false," Jackman shot back, his voice rising for the first time since the interview began, the veneer of professional calm finally starting to crack. "Our suppliers are required to meet strict ethical standards. We have regular inspections, third-party, verification, and complete documentation of our entire supply chain from farm to cup." "Do you?" Colbert's eyebrows rose in mock surprise, his performance becoming more theatrical by the moment. "Because what I'm looking at here suggests that your regular inspections haven't been quite as regular as you claim. In fact, it appears that your last actual inspection was over 18 months ago, and even that was conducted by a company with questionable credentials." The host was clearly enjoying himself now, feeding off the discomfort radiating from both his guest and the audience like a vampire feeding on blood. This wasn't the political satire that had made him famous. This was something much darker and more personal, a public execution disguised as journalism. Jackman leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that carried more menace than any shout. "I don't know what game you're playing here, Stephen, but you're making accusations that could destroy people's livelihoods. Real people with families who depend on the partnerships we've built and the ethical business practices we've established." "Games?" Colbert laughed, but there was no humor in it, only malice and calculated cruelty. "The only game being played. Here is the one where Hollywood celebrities use charity and activism as cover for the same exploitation they claim to oppose. And you, Hugh, you've been playing that game better than most, hiding behind your nice guy image." The tension in the studio was now so thick it was almost suffocating, like being trapped in a room filling with toxic gas. Camera operators were getting signals from the control room, but no one seemed to know whether to keep rolling or cut away. This was television history in the making, but not the kind anyone wanted to be remembered for. "You want to talk about exploitation?" Jackman's voice was steady now, but there was an edge to it that suggested a dam about to burst with devastating force. "Let's talk about what you're doing right now, ambushing a guest with unverified allegations, destroying reputations for ratings, using your platform to spread lies and misinformation." "Lies?" Colbert's voice rose sharply, his mask of civility finally beginning to slip completely. "Hugh, I have documentation. I have photographs. I have testimonies from workers who can barely afford to feed their families while you profit from their labor and build your empire on their backs." "Show them then," Jackman demanded, his composure finally beginning to shatter completely like glass under pressure. "If you have all this evidence, show it to everyone right now. Let's see these photographs you're so proud of, these testimonies you claim to possess." Colbert's hesitation was barely perceptible, lasting only a fraction of a second, but Jackman caught it immediately with the instincts of someone who had spent decades reading people and situations. The host's confident facade flickered for just a moment, revealing something much more calculating and desperate underneath the surface. Oh, we'll get to that, Colbert said, trying desperately to regain his momentum and control of the situation. But first, I think our audience deserves to hear you address these allegations directly and honestly. Are you denying that Laughing Man coffee sources from plantations with substandard working conditions? I'm denying your right to make accusations without proof, Jackman fired back with increasing intensity. And I'm questioning your motives for turning what should have been a conversation about my upcoming projects into a character assassination designed to destroy my reputation and career. The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with some people actually getting up from their seats and heading for the exits. The energy had shifted from entertainment to something much more sinister and disturbing, and everyone present could feel the weight of what was happening. Character assassination? Colbert's voice dripped with false indignation, his performance reaching new heights of theatrical cruelty. Hugh, I'm just asking the questions that responsible journalism demands. Questions about how you can sleep at night knowing that children are working in fields to support your lifestyle and fund your Hollywood career. That was the moment when everyone watching knew there would be no coming back from this devastating exchange. Jackman's face went completely white, then flushed with anger so intense it was almost frightening to witness. The transformation was complete and total. The beloved movie star had disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who looked capable of ending careers with a single word. The studio lights seemed to dim as if even the electricity was afraid of what was about to happen. Security guards positioned themselves more strategically around the stage, sensing that this situation was spiraling completely out of control and could turn physical at any moment. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of what would become the most notorious interview in late-night television history, a moment that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come. The silence that followed was deafening, like the moment before a nuclear explosion. For several heartbeats, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody dared to make a sound. Then Jackman stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over the desk that separated him from his tormentor like a mountain rising from the earth. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, but carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the studio lean forward to catch every single word. "Stephen," he said, each syllable deliberate and measured, delivered with the precision of a surgeon making a life-or-death incision. "I've spent the last 15 minutes listening to you make accusations without presenting a single piece of credible evidence. You've attacked my character, my business, and my integrity based on what appears to be nothing more than malicious speculation and fabricated lies." Colbert tried to interrupt, his mouth opening like a fish gasping for air. But Jackman held up a hand that commanded instant silence throughout the entire studio. "I'm not finished." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, and even the air conditioning seemed to pause in respect. "You want to talk about exploitation? Let's talk about what you've done here tonight. You invited me onto your show under false pretenses, then ambushed me with unsubstantiated claims designed to destroy my reputation for the sake of your ratings and your own twisted entertainment." The host's confident smirk was wavering now, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic spreading across his face. "Hugh, I think you're overreacting here. This is just good television, asking the tough questions that need to be asked, doing the kind of journalism that—" "Good television?" Jackman's voice cut through the air like a blade forged in righteous fury. "You call destroying someone's livelihood good television? You call lying to an audience and spreading misinformation good television?" He turned to address the crowd directly, his charisma now weaponized into something formidable and unstoppable. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed tonight isn't journalism. It's a hit job orchestrated by someone who has lost all sense of decency and professional ethics." Several audience members began applauding, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm that rippled through the crowd like wildfire. The tide was turning dramatically, and everyone could feel the shift in power happening in real time. Colbert was scrambling now, desperately trying to regain control of the situation, that was slipping through his fingers like sand. "Now wait. Just a minute, Hugh. I have sources. I have documentation. I have evidence that clearly shows—" "Then show it." Jackman's voice boomed through the studio with the force of thunder. "Right now. Show everyone these photographs you claim to have. Present this documentation you keep talking about. Let's see the evidence that you've used to justify this character assassination and public humiliation." The host's hands moved to the manila folder with trembling fingers, but his hesitation was obvious to everyone watching. When he opened it, with shaking hands, instead of the damning evidence he'd promised, there were only a few printed pages that looked suspiciously like internet printouts and poorly doctored photographs. "These are preliminary findings," Colbert stammered, his composure completely shattered now, sweat beading on his forehead. "The investigation is ongoing, but the implications are clear, and the evidence speaks for itself." "The implications," Jackman interrupted, his voice now carrying the full weight of barely contained fury that could level buildings, "are that you've built an entire segment around rumors and speculation. You've taken unverified gossip and presented it as fact to destroy someone's reputation on national television." The audience was fully on Jackman's side now, with boos and catcalls beginning to emerge from the crowd directed squarely at Colbert. Security personnel were starting to position themselves around the stage, sensing that the situation was spiraling completely out of control and could turn ugly fast. "But even if your accusations were true," Jackman continued, his voice rising to address not just Colbert, but the entire studio and everyone watching at home, "which they are categorically not, what gives you the right to ambush someone on national television? What happened to basic human decency? What happened to journalistic integrity and professional standards?" Colbert tried one last desperate gambit, his voice cracking with desperation. "Hugh, you're being defensive here. If you have nothing to hide, then why not just answer the questions honestly and openly?" That was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Jackman's laugh was cold and humorless, cutting through the tension like ice. "Defensive? Stephen, I'm being attacked by someone who clearly has an agenda that has nothing to do with truth or justice." He began removing his microphone with deliberate precision, his movements controlled and purposeful. "I came here tonight to talk about my upcoming film, to share some laughs with your audience, to do what guests have done on talk shows for decades." The microphone pack hit the floor with a dull thud that seemed to echo through the stunned silence, like a judge's gavel delivering a final verdict. "Instead, I find myself subjected to what can only be described as a character assassination based on fabricated evidence and malicious intent." Jackman's voice was now carrying to every corner of the studio without amplification. Such was the power of his presence. "I will not sit here and dignify this circus with my presence any longer." He turned to the audience, his demeanor shifting, back to the gracious performer they knew and loved, the transformation immediate and complete. "To everyone who came here tonight expecting entertainment, I apologize that you had to witness this travesty. You deserve better than what this show has become under this man's leadership." The applause was immediate and thunderous, lasting for what felt like minutes. People were getting to their feet, giving Jackman a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Some were actually chanting his name, while others were directing their displeasure toward the host with unmistakable clarity and venom. Colbert sat frozen behind his desk, his face a mixture of shock and growing realization of what he had just done to his own career and reputation. The control room was in chaos, with producers frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue to its inevitable conclusion. "Stephen," Jackman said, turning back to face his host one final time, his voice carrying the weight of finality, "I hope whatever you thought you would gain from this was worth it. Because what you've lost tonight is far more valuable than any ratings spike you might achieve." With that, Hugh Jackman walked off the stage. With the dignity and composure of someone who had just won a battle he never wanted to fight. The audience continued their thunderous applause as he disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a host whose career would never recover from the miscalculation of thinking he could destroy one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. The cameras continued rolling as Colbert sat alone at his desk, the weight of his actions settling over him like a burial shroud. The show would end in complete chaos. The audience would file out in stunned silence, and by morning, the entire entertainment industry would be talking about the night when Stephen Colbert's arrogance finally met its match in Hugh Jackman's unwavering integrity and moral courage. This was the moment that would define both their legacies forever. One man's spectacular fall from grace, and another's triumphant defense of truth and dignity in the face of calculated malice and professional destruction.